welcome to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. Good to see you, Arif. I'm wondering, did you happen to see the development proposal that came out in the news this week about a development for the Barrie Raceway site? Have you seen that?
Mike, it's interesting and it's great to see you as well. And Mike, we just recently had Groundhog Day, and then again today we had Groundhog Day today because once again there is another proposal making headlines. Certainly, it's before council and it's now the talk of some people because yes, absolutely, this piece of land that has been on the market or in the back of people's minds in terms of what's going to happen with it. Will anything ever happen to it? We're on certainly the fourth, fifth, something like that proposal coming forward before council. And obviously, yes, it's of the size and scale that it's got people talking. And I think that's fantastic.
That's what's unique about this. It's probably unprecedented, the size and the scope of this project. And just for those who may not know, we're talking about at the intersection of Essa Road and the 400 Highway, one of the main off-ramps from the 400 into Barrie that people use. At the northeast corner there's a 55-acre lot. A little bit of history on that quickly. It was once the Barrie Harness Racetrack. They used to hold the Barrie Fair there every summer. And that shut down. The Horticultural Society that owned the property sold it to Osmington Group, which is the Thompson family, Canada's richest family. I believe at the time, 15 or 20 years ago or so, they had designs on building a large commercial retail complex there. Park Place came in shortly after that, so it changed their plans and it sat in limbo until recently. It's been resold to a group called, off the top of my head, I think I had written it down here. They're Green World, I believe. Green World Development has purchased it. And now they have designs on putting what's proposed to be a unit of, how many is it? There's 55 acres site, 2,828 units. And I think 420 of them would be townhouses and then 9 possibly towers. It's a community in and of itself. Would be interesting.
Absolutely, Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. There's a lot there, and I'm glad you're giving the history there a little bit. I'm going to make it just a slight finesse to that history, just a touch, because your statement that you started with, though, about it being seemingly unprecedented, and while it may be unprecedented, I want to sort of just temper that with, and we should not be surprised, right? We shouldn't be surprised. But if you look back over the history that you sort of briefly described, yes, the parcel of land has changed hands from ownership to ownership. And I believe at one point, Osmington was a division of the Thompson group of companies. And then it eventually was sort of parceled off as an organization as well. And then that group had this piece of land, as well as, just for a little bit of context, was in charge of doing the Union Station down in Toronto, all the renovation and redevelopment work that's gone on down there. And it sat in there. Absolutely, a number of proposals did come forward, but while potentially unprecedented, and this is the point I really want to make, we shouldn't be surprised, because if you're watching what has happened over the past decades, and as you mentioned, Park Place was approved and developed, and that put a damper or change on the potential development plan being put forward on this site that we're talking about today. Well, if you go back a little bit before that, everybody talking about, well, how come Park Place doesn't look like what it was supposed to look like in the drawings? Well, that's because Tanger Outlet Mall bought the owner, took over from Cookstown and that redeveloped that and redeveloped the anchors and redeveloped the brands that were attracted and bought into going over to Tanger, because the Park Place project sat in limbo at City Hall with one argument after the next.
Went to the OMB, I believe, before.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. And then this is a little bit of inside baseball, but there was, of course, some pressure put on by the company that is now the Georgian Mall, but I believe back in the day it was Cadillac Fairview, that said, if you go over to Park Place, we won't let you in any of our malls anywhere that we have a banner. So again, pressure. There's a lot of competition out there. Well, yeah, call it whatever you want. Basically, certainly influence. So, is it a surprise that what was originally planned for this harness racing track site changed over time? Well, no, because while it was sitting waiting for approval, the rest of the world continued to go forward. And that's really what I want to get to. What we're seeing as a proposal today looks a little different from the one that we saw last time and different from the one that we saw before. Why? Because they're putting forth what they believe is going to be a best business plan going forward on something that they can build, afford to build, will have uptake on, that the market will absorb, that the market is looking for. And that market may or may not include the people who are already here.
Yeah, and we are at a point in time with supply and demand being where it is within Barrie and within all of Ontario with regards to real estate, that a proposal of this scale should be welcomed, and it's not all that out of context. There are a couple other projects that have been approved. One's underway right now within Barrie. One of them being the lands across from the marina that sit between Lakeshore and Bradford Street. And I believe there's a proposal for a 4-tower, 1,700 unit complex that has been approved there. Whether it gets built or not, that's another thing. I think that Smart Centers is behind that. And another one that would, be close to, maybe, but not quite as large as this is, I think it's a 928 unit complex, is going on the former YMCA property, which is on Grove Street, just to the west of Bayfield Street in Barrie, and that there's shovels in the ground. That's being built as we speak. So there are some bigger projects coming forward, and as we move forward, so long as there are those few dear pieces of land left in Barrie with the potential to be developed, I think we're going to see larger scale projects, because multi-residential is the future of growth and development. We're not going to see sprawling subdivisions being built like we did in the 80s and 90s anymore. The land's
So Mike, I mean, I think now is the perfect time to put a disclaimer across the bottom of banner across the bottom of our show that there's a good chance somebody's not going to like to hear what we're talking about. But you're absolutely correct. And again, for those who are wondering, oh, this particular site that we're talking about today, it's the gateway to the city and it's been an eyesore. But of course, putting up 9 towers on this site is going to be an eyesore. We'll get into some of that in a bit, Mike. But going back to some of the other development sites that you've talked about, of course, there's what we refer to in the real estate world and in the planning world and in the appraisal world and in economics is highest and best use of a particular site. If you're going to consider change, or if you're considering sort of what is the viability of a proposal going forward, you do want to look at what is the highest and best use. So for people who are wondering what's been going on down on Lakeshore or at the former YMCA site or on Bradford Street, et cetera, again, everything's connected. So if you look back not so long ago, there was a very vibrant conversation around the former Central High School, Central Collegiate, the high school site, and what the future would hold there. And there was discussion on whether that would include a YMCA. There was discussion on whether that would include a conference space. There was discussion on whether that would include residential space. There was also discussion, though, on the future of Barrie not so many years ago, on whether Barrie would be an ideal or a prime candidate, a successful candidate for a university site. And if so, where could it go? And the sites that we've been talking about, Ron, including the central site, not necessarily the one you're talking about in between Bradford and Lakeshore, but the central site, as well as the site of the Horticultural Society, both of them have been considered at one point for a university. And if and when that's considered, anybody else thinking about what they might do with a neighboring parcel of land is probably best to sit and wait and see how that shakes out to decide whether or not they're going to put money behind something and if that money will be, successfully returned or lost. So just a little context, right?
Yeah, Ron's taking notes, and I'm listening too. And but there's a lot of challenges that go along with these projects beyond a certain size. I mean, there's a lot of parties, there's a lot of moving parts, and as you referenced the old Barrie Central Collegiate site. There were different parties to be involved in there, and their plans change. So, assuring the money is there is thing. And then there's the approval process itself, going through the city. And something I read recently that took me by surprise and humbled me a little bit, because we're always whining about the challenges of getting projects approved and red tape at City Hall. And it's not that that does not happen, but it was interesting to see that recently Barrie received high marks among Ontario municipalities as being a place where the approval process runs quite well, comparatively speaking. So there's still room for improvement there, but it was interesting to hear that. But one of the biggest challenges facing growth and development centers around the resistance to new development from the existing Barrie residents. That's always been a challenge. That being a former councillor at City Hall, any project, be it as small as a duplex being proposed to something, along the lines of what we're talking about today, there's always a full gallery of people there who are adamant about seeing that this project does not go forward. And I thought we could talk a little bit at some point through the show about some of the typical excuses or reasons that are brought forward, and we'll analyze each one for its merits and see where they fit with regards to this project or just any project in general for Barrie.
And Mike, and that's a very fair comment and a fair statement to make. I think it's also fair for people to have mixed emotions about something coming forward. And again, putting a little bit of context in there, if the subject site in question was right in the middle of a neighborhood, and there was going to be a dramatic change being proposed, one could argue that there's some emotions that are running high, and here's the thing: change is never easy.
No,
it's not easy. Yeah, and it's fine. And it's fine that change isn't easy. However, the other way that you can look at it is change is the only constant. We've all heard that before. So change is the only constant, and we each get to decide how we're going to respond or react to it. Are we going to embrace it and make the best of it and see how we can find an opportunity in it? Or are we going to allow that opportunity to pass us by and we become disgruntled because somebody else won out on the opportunity? So, Mike, we do have to go to a break. But when we come back, let's pick up on that exactly as you talked about. And let's look at some of the public opinion and public feedback that's coming in. And, well, we might offer up a little bit of context around that and maybe a little bit of opinion on that
too. Make a few friends, lose a few friends. We'll see where it goes.
Exactly. But on the other side of the break, Mike and I are going to continue the conversation around the recent proposal at the intersection of Essa Road and the 400, formerly known as the racetrack, the harness racetrack, the Agriculture and Horticultural Society. We'll be right back with more of Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on the other side of this break.
Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif, and we're having a great discussion here about a proposed development for the lands at 400 Highway and Essa Road, and just about development in general as we move forward and the city of Barrie grows and progresses here. And you touched on something just before the break, Arif, I thought was quite interesting with regards to resistance that we see from existing residents. And more often than not, that resistance is coming from people who are looking at a project that's being proposed for in the midst of single family residential development, and suddenly there's a 3-story development or a cluster of townhomes proposed. Their thinking is it's inconsistent with the flow of what's there already. And I think with regards to that, and those people who may be just in a general sort of way against any type of development, think for a second about this proposal here. It's not in the midst of any residential. In fact, it's bordered on 3 sides by arterial roadways. I think at the back of the site, there may be single-family residential beyond there. There's a cluster of trees along that property line, but so it's not completely isolated from other single-family residential. But as close to that as you're going to see for a site this size within the built boundaries of the city of Barrie. So I think with
Yeah.
that, then, this does present itself as an ideal place for a larger multi-residential. Would you agree?
Sure, Mike. I mean, at the risk of playing a hand here, or revealing my hand, let's put it that way. I mean, I think you make some very fair comments. You make some good comments. I want to be fair to people, because change, as I said just before the break, it's not easy, but it is certainly constant. But putting some things into perspective here, again, this is not the only application that is seeing some type of a substantial change happening to people, in the presence of people who plan to remain as the neighbor, right? But if you go along many of our corridors, whether it's Essa Road or Yonge Street, or you pick a street, right, Mike? Certainly, certainly Yonge Street is seeing a lot of that change happening right now.
And
we're seeing a lot of these. Exactly. A lot of the homes that might have been built, I'm going to guess in the 50s and 60s, as single family homes that are along, along Yonge Street, they're being bought in bundles. They're being bought by a conglomerate who's going to sort of do some land assembly there. And what we have seen come out of that is, a development similar to Allendale Station, which is a retirement community. We're seeing other condos that are being built. And again, this is part of planning. So you're going from residential, which is single use residential or lower density residential, to a higher density residential, being a condo or a retirement home in this particular case. However, the size and scale in proportion to the neighbors is what hasn't had an impact on the neighbors who are sort of backing onto Yonge Street, or backing onto one street, one property behind Yonge Street. And so they now are faced with whether it's a 5, 6, or 8-story building that is sort of perhaps looking down into their backyard. Well, I can tell you that it's from my experience and my understanding, very rarely is somebody in that community setting going to be standing looking out their window straight down into your backyard. It doesn't really happen that way. However, I can understand that is sort of the impression. Now, here's the thing. We've gone from residential to residential, but we've gone from a different built size or built form into a much more substantial one. But it's not precedent setting. Looking at this piece of land that we're talking about today, first and foremost, the neighbors who live in the neighborhood just sort of abutting this parcel of land, and this is a larger parcel of land, as we talked about, 55 plus acres.
Yeah.
They have seen already transition, but at no time on that land was there ever residential.
No.
At no time on that land, there were horses at one point, there was harness racing, there was a racetrack.
Yeah.
There was noise, there were speakers, there was music, there was a commotion, there were cars and trailers and masses of people there, and there were loudspeakers that were blasting into their backyards
because
so you could call the race.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
now that went away. Yeah. Well, okay. To a degree, I'm just saying it's never been a quiet residential neighborhood there.
It's not that drastic a change. It's a busy.
There's another thought, Mike.
Use.
There's another thought, Mike, though, and I think that we need to follow along with the story. There's also been there's also been industrial use in the land behind it, closer to Tiffin Street.
Bordering that little neighborhood that is behind this project. Yeah, it's not just this site, but other former industrial sites.
Exactly.
Not to mention the 400 highway is a stone's throw away. So there's the level of noise pollution coming from the highway will continue to be higher than any noise pollution this project is going to add. And I guarantee you that. So in terms of those things that you mentioned, the fact that it is on a main arterial road, Essa Road has growth nodes all along it. It's earmarked for higher density residential development. You're next to a major highway. If not this property, then the question is where in Barrie would you build a large scale property if this one doesn't qualify?
Well, Mike, and here's the other thing, though.
More qualified.
If nothing else, those towers that are proposed will provide a sound barrier, a sound wall from the highway.
Yeah,
So
they
there's
will.
that. And I'm not trying to salvage
Truthfully,
merits.
they
I'm
will.
saying if you're
Yes.
worried about noise and if you're worried about the sound of traffic and if you're worried about
Yeah.
this, well, listen, for starters, it's going to create a bit of a barrier. But secondly, as you quite rightly pointed out, looking at the cross section and looking at the sort of a topography as well as sort of the layout of this parcel of land, if
Yeah.
you're going to have density come in, where we are going to have people, first and foremost, the mix of residential with the retail. I heard it argued like that's a bad idea. Well, no, in fact, that is exactly the idea. If you can have people walking from their condo or from their apartment, from their place of dwelling,
Yeah.
if you can have people walking to their local shop, to their local restaurant, to their local barber, to their local grocery store, whatever it may be, that's actually going to take pressure off of the road system because you're not going to be driving 15 minutes in your car creating traffic and creating chaos in order to get from where you are to where you're going. So you're going to have a lot of walkability by design is what I'm reading and what it looks like. And if they're following any of the basic planning guidelines and principles now, yes, that's what we're going to be doing. Okay.
Yeah.
Secondly, in addition to that, if they are getting in their car or if they are going to use transit, we've got the transit hub and we've also got all of the access and egress points to and from the highway system.
Yeah.
So instead of people having to get in their car from a location 3-4 kilometers away from the highway entrance, they're literally going to be getting in their car and hopping on the highway within 200 meters, 300 meters, something like that.
And
so again,
yeah, that's great opportunity. And, there's opportunity and there are fears, real and imagined. So let's talk a little bit. We'll get back to some of the opportunities there, but let's talk a little bit about some of those fears. And they're typically fears that we see raised with any development, and especially larger scale developments. And one of them is that this development is going to create total traffic chaos in the area. And I would challenge that because the same argument was made for the gallery condos that were built, a group of buildings built on Essa Road, which at the time were probably one of the larger scale developments, precedent setting in that regard at the time. Traffic was going to be a nightmare as a result. And no, the traffic really didn't change because people aren't all leaving and coming at the same time. Yes, Essa Road is seeing some issues with traffic right now, but ironically, most of our traffic issues in the city aren't around population so much as the fact that the city of Barrie is working diligently to improve and widen and increase the traffic flow capacity of our roads in the city, just to serve a growing city as we see. So while those projects are underway, yes, it creates traffic chaos. And certainly if this development goes forward, there will be added traffic during the time that it's being developed. But rather than dump trucks going through a neighborhood near you, they're going to be exiting and entering right off the 400 highway. So that's a plus right there with regards to that. So
yeah, a couple things to put
worse as a result? I think once all the roads are completed along that stretch there, even with a development of this scale, I think the traffic flow will either remain consistent or could even improve.
Okay, so a couple things to keep into consideration there as well. You're 100% correct that the majority of traffic constraint or aggravation, if you will, that people are sensing is largely in part due to the fact that there have been no less than a dozen, I don't know, maybe it's even up into 20 and 30 different projects going around the city. Typically we have some seasons in which this type of work can get done. And the city and its people making the decisions in terms of scheduling. Of course, scheduling is impacted by when crews are available, when equipment is available, as well as when the money is available, and as well as how any given project has to coexist with another project that's happening. So, for example, around the 400 highway and any of the interchanges there, you're impacting traffic flow on and off of the highway. You now instantly are tying into the scheduling and the permissions being granted by the Ministry of Transportation for Ontario. They're responsible for mitigating traffic impact to whatever degree they possibly can. So now you look at a project like this, which is going to bring on about 2,500 units plus or minus, along with any of the retail that may be impacted. They're probably not all funneling in through one particular access point. However, remember, the growth is also helping to spur the infrastructure improvements. The infrastructure improvements were long overdue. The infrastructure improvements have been on the minds of many people, and people have been saying, when is it happening? Well, throw in the gallery condos, throw in this project, throw in a few other projects. You'll note as well, we recently completed the Harvey Bridge opening. That is taken, and that was so well timed because it took pressure ahead of shutting down Essa Road.
Bryan Drive
so it was
continue right through from Mapleview.
And now we've got Bryan Drive scheduled to go through. So Gallery, I'm sure, had a bit of an impact on that, but so does the fact that they're doing this bridge work and intersection work on Essa Road and on Dunlop, by the way, as well. So putting through Bryan Drive is going to have a serious impact in a positive manner on relieving traffic. So again, all of this happening, we're going to 6 lanes. We're improving the intersection itself.
Just to speak to that, little background on that, we're at 6 lanes right now and have been for some time for the 400 highway. Now, the 400 highway.
I'm talking about Essa Road.
Oh, okay, yeah. Now the 400 highway is 6 lanes, and uniquely that highway cuts almost through Barrie. At one time when it was built, it kind of went around Barrie because Barrie was a much smaller town. As Barrie grew, it leapfrogged over the 400 highway, and now we've got a lot of residential on either side of the 400 highway all around Barrie. And there's people want to get from one side to the other, and there's limited crossover points. Now, the 400 highway was built in the 1950s. I'm just going to throw a little history here. 400 highway.
Well, I'm actually going to ask you to hold on to your history for a second while we go to break real quick. And then when we come back, give us the history and we'll talk about how this impacts.
That. So, stay in your seats, folks. We'll give it a little history lesson on the 400 highway when we come back after this break. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. We're talking about real estate growth within Barrie. In particular, we're talking about the site, the former Barrie Raceway lands at the corner of the 400 highway and Essa Road, which is scheduled to see a mega development, if it's approved, coming to Barrie. And we're talking about the pros and cons of such a development and some of the benefits that it may bring and some of the negatives that people who are against such projects typically bring up. And one of the other things that we typically hear, actually, before we get to that, we were talking about the 400 highway cutting through Barrie, and we're at a point that was built 70 years ago. So we're seeing the need to rebuild the bridges, and there's 4 or 5 of them that cross the 400 highway in Barrie. All of them are one at a time being rebuilt to allow for a wider 400 highway. Right now we're at 6 lanes. It's going to be 8 lanes pretty soon, and it's 8 lanes in some parts already as it's being built. So that bridge construction, it's going to make the traffic better. It's going to cause a little bit of inconvenience, as it has been while those bridges are being built. But overall, I think it shows that Barrie's progressing, Barrie's growing. But some of the resistance, again, one of the things that I always hear when, and you've heard it yourself as city councilor, when you hear those deputations coming forward in resistance to a proposed residential project, people always seem to say, well, it's going to increase the crime in our neighborhood. It's going to make our streets unsafe. I've never seen a report. I've never seen the data that would support such claims. What are your thoughts, Arif? Would a project of 2,800 new units and potentially 5,000 new residents to Barrie living within one, 55-acre community, Is that going to cause, crime to go up in our city? What do you think?
Gee, I don't even know if I can start with answering that question, Mike. I will get to it in just a moment, but you put a lot on the table there, and I think
I certainly
it's
did.
good information. You're correct. I mean, the infrastructure's old, it's aging, and there's nothing convenient at any. But there's never a good time to shut down and cause
No.
traffic delays, et cetera. But one thing is for sure, it's better to do it now than to wait and do it when it's more expensive and it's less convenient and all those things. So it has to happen, and it is happening, and I think it's the responsible thing to do.
Yeah.
We also can look just to our south, to our neighbors in our south who are having to deal with aging infrastructure that did not get addressed. And unfortunately, they've had some real unfortunate circumstances when bridges collapse and the infrastructure falls and lands on a car, or a piece of concrete falls off, right? So we obviously don't want that happening here. So this is the right time to be doing it, if ever there was one. And yes, that we're going to have some short-term inconvenience, and yes, we're going to get over it. We're going to move on. We're going to live through it. In terms of people who are in opposition or in favor of any proposal, we live in a beautiful country with the great democracy and the ability to be heard and to expect our voices to be heard. It doesn't mean that our voices are going to be heard and they're going to do what we told them to do. That's not how this works. But here's the thing, Mike. I've often found there are people who come and they're, somewhat inspired or motivated to get their words across and to be heard, and they're passionate. And I think first and foremost, the most important thing is that you have a voice and it does get heard.
Yes.
And there are people, I heard countless times, people said, listen, I know it's probably not going to change the outcome, but I'm here to say my piece.
Yeah. But legitimate claims are usually addressed and given due consideration when they come before the city. That's been my experience.
The vast majority of people who come forward with a deputation, and remember this, by the way, currently, and certainly until recently, and I don't think anything has changed, all right, and I think this is a little bit unfortunate. However, currently, the way the system works is you're only a deputant if you are going to speak against something that is being proposed. It is assumed that the applicant is the proponent and the people who are offering a deputation are speaking against something. Rarely, if ever, unless it slips through, are they speaking in favor. That's the way the system is. That doesn't mean that that there was nobody in favor. It just means the people who are in favor didn't say anything and didn't have an opportunity to say anything. And that is, unfortunately, the design of the system. And I said, unfortunately, I guess you get my opinion in there for free. So here's the thing. It is important that people get to speak. The other thing that needs to be taken into consideration is there is a series of tests. Shadow studies are always done. Noise studies are always done. Environmental studies are always done. Someone's going to speak about them anyway. And there's an assumption that the people who have the jobs for 30 years and have all the credentials don't know what they're doing. By some, there's a small component of people who have very little faith in the system whatsoever. And that is what it is. Here's the thing. You're absolutely right, Mike. Growth has to happen. We are mandated to grow. Population and immigration, we are mandated to grow. We're going to get into some other information about the age of our population coming up in the show as well. But just cat out of the bag a little bit is, in order for us as a society to continue to take care of the things that need taken care of, whether that's people or places or things that need taken care of, we need to have revenue coming in. We need to have a healthy economy. We need to have tax revenue coming in. And it's not about greedy this or greedy that. Is if you don't have anybody paying the bill, you're not going to be able to afford to have the services. And so we have to address that. But for those people who don't want it in their backyard, then here's a great alternative, because a lot of people don't want it in their backyard. A lot of people don't want to see
that's why
a changing
this is an ideal
face.
site, I think. Yeah.
This is an ideal site. To your specific question around crime, first and foremost, I'll say it again and again and again until the story changes. And yes, we had some really unfortunate isolated incidents happening in the news in the last week or two, where we have seen some fatalities, and there's nothing good to say about them. What I can say and what the data will tell us is Barrie still remains the safest city in the entire country. And that's a fact. It's not open for opinion, and that's based on the data that comes in that is not produced by Barrie data, right? We're not talking about how great we are. It's other parties telling us that we are the safest city in the country. In terms of crime and safety in built up areas, though, it is a proven fact that if we can have more populated areas where we have more traffic, where we have more community engagement, where people are walking around, more eyeballs on, and you better believe in a development that has 9 towers and residential sort of retail establishments, there are going to be security cameras, there are going to be security patrols. Excuse me, and there's going to be the whole built-in neighborhood watch system that's going to be taking effect. In the majority of crime that happens in a city, period, happens in an area that does not have built-up residential. Right? It happens
back alleys. Yeah,
exactly. Sparsely laid out, darker streets, darker alleys, open areas. When you have larger population centers, you actually have a much safer setting.
Yeah, for sure. And a couple other claims that are quite common to hear at, in resistance to development. One of them that I just laugh at is that, the city officials are in the pockets of the developers. That's just couldn't be further from the fact, but it makes for nice fodder to just suggest such a thing. But the other thing is too, a development like this is going to be ugly. Like that's, there was even a counselor in response to this who was interviewed was saying, well, this is going to be the first thing people see when they come up the highway. Well, the first thing people have seen for the last 20 years when they come up the highway is an overgrown, unkempt field. That does not speak well for the city of Barrie. I've seen the renderings for this, and if the development remains true to those renderings, this is going to be quite a modern, progressive-looking complex here. That's going to speak well for Barrie. It's going to show off Barrie and say that we are a progressive city that's on the move. And I say to that, I can't wait for this transition to take place, and I hope it does go forward.
Yeah, Mike, I will tell you, unless I was just really sort of at odds with everybody else that's ever come before me, I can tell you during my time, not one applicant ever came, whether it was for a single use, like of a personal nature, or whether it was a developer of a larger corporation, ever, not once did they ever come to me in an inappropriate fashion and try to sway. Of course, they asked for dialogue and they asked if we would meet, and they were very professional about saying, we'd love to sit with you and answer any questions. We'd love to go through so that you're not just seeing a 10-minute presentation at council with no other supporting information. They always invited us to get the information. Didn't mean that we're going to agree. In fact, they stated up front, you're probably not going to agree with something here or there, but we're here to answer your questions. We welcome your feedback.
People deserve to be heard.
And I absolutely adamantly believe that the good group of people who are around the table today and the staff who support them are in a similar position with the similar level of integrity. So that, laughable, maybe unfortunate that it's being floated out there as an idea. Not that it's never happened and not that it doesn't happen in other jurisdictions, but I have never seen it here. In terms of the actual quality and will the development hold up to what is being proposed, I will tell you, I am on record at somewhere, and I'm sure I made an enemy or didn't put a smile on the face of somebody who was an applicant at some point during my time. But I did, in fact, raise concern around what you just talked about there. Will the actual development look anything like what is being proposed on paper? And I can tell you that there are a couple of developers in town where I would say that didn't happen.
No.
I'm not going to name names on the show today. That's not necessary. It's inappropriate. But I do encourage our friends on council and the people that we elect and put there to hold them to it and to stand by it, because
we can always do a better job of that. Yeah.
And if you look at other jurisdictions, Mike, if you look down in York Region, if you look down in Markham in particular, yes, the quality of the material can impact the final price of the build, and that's a factor. And we are talking about housing affordability. However, there are ways to do things right. And if done right, it can absolutely be a very attractive design.
You can, economies of scale suggest that the larger a complex is, the more room there is to build a higher
absolutely, Mike,
for a better price. And
how you scape it, how you do the landscaping, how you do the walkways, how you do the lighting,
Yeah, it all plays into
of
it.
that does matter. And
Yeah.
you're right, it spreads it out across the
Yeah.
cost. Mike, we do have to go to break. What do you want to talk about when we come back?
Well, I'd like to talk about the reasons why people are continuing to come up here a little bit, and some of the pros, never mind like the negatives that we've been, talking about here, some of the advantages of growth and development, and how a project like this is good for Barrie, and let's delve into that a little bit more.
Stay with us on the other side of this break on Rogers TV with more of Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif, and we're currently talking about a development application that has come forth to City Hall once again on the property formerly known as the Barrie Racetrack. At the pretty much intersection of the 400 and Essa Road. And Mike, we've been talking about really what does that development look like? How might it impact the neighbors in the neighborhood? How might it impact traffic? How might it impact, how might people be feeling about this proposal coming forward? Yep. And we've talked a little bit about sort of what is the motive behind it, and sort of what might be, what might be the things that people are talking about that they're not too pleased about. But what we really haven't spent a lot of time talking about is sort of what is some of the positives that can come out of an application.
There's legitimate pros and cons, and we talked about some of the cons and some of the pros. We have to consider as well that there's something I just read in the past week: $207,000. What does that number represent? Well, that is the household income you are going to need at the moment to buy an average price GTA home, $207,000 household income. So there's a lot of people that don't meet that requirement, and those are the ones who are migrating north. They're coming to Barrie, and they'll continue to come to Barrie, and that is precisely why we need to continue building to accommodate people, because if we don't provide the housing that's required for the demand, that's why we see prices being driven up. And
so, Mike, let's put a little perspective on some things here. Okay. So first and foremost, right, what is the average priced home in the GTA? I think we're somewhere around $1.5 million for an average priced home in the GTA. So someone in Barrie may say, well, what does that have to do with me? Because that's not our reality here. No, our reality is somewhere around $800,000. So do the math on that. Do you need a $207,000 income? Maybe not. Maybe you need $103,500 household income in order to afford the average home in Barrie. Well, average household income in Barrie is around $88,000 last time I checked. Not sure if that's exactly accurate for 2023 numbers, but it was accurate last time those numbers were reported. So putting some things in perspective, though, again, Mike, you're absolutely right. People are leaving the GTA because they don't have necessarily a household income of $207,000. And because of technology and because of recent events over the last few years, we've learned that we do not need to live in walking distance to our place of work. We can telecommute, we can commute by the internet, that kind of thing. So yes, absolutely. Our region, and this is not unique to Barrie, but our region and regions that are similar will continue to be attractive to people to migrate out of the major population centers.
And I'd like anybody who's, opposed in a general sort of way to development and growth in Barrie, just consider this for a moment. The 25 to 35 age demographic is one of the larger, proponents of or components of our population. And it's certainly bigger than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. These are all people who have designs on buying a house at some point. So if you're sitting there in your home that you bought 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago in Barrie, when you got to cherry pick from all those, 60 by 120 foot deep detached homes, and you're set, everything's good, you're cozy, and you're shutting down or trying to get in the, be an obstacle to growth and development because it's multi-residential. Well, that is precisely the type of home opportunities that are going to be available going forward to people buying their first homes. So you had your chance. You got to come in, at a good time. It was a sweet spot for you and me and everybody else who was able to buy in the last 5, 10, 20 years in the Barrie area. we need to provide, a clear pathway for those who want to buy going forward, rather than say,
Yeah.
hey, I'm set now, I'm comfy, to hell with the rest of you. And that's basically what you're saying when you show up to say, I don't want these developments in my community.
So something else to think about, though, Mike.
Yeah.
Something else to think about. We've also got the component of the population that is still a healthy, active adult who's looking to maybe downsize from their two-story home or the home where they have to cut the grass, and they're looking for an affordable option or a relatively affordable option to get into something where there is, some services that are offered, like in a condo type of dwelling. So there may also be making way for families that are growing coming up from the GTA. But the other thing that is a positive that we can look at is, again, we talked about how this continued population growth and development spurs on infrastructure renewal. So too does it spur on the need to improve our rapid transit system. So we've got the GO train, we got the Express GO trains going in. When we have more people who are going to be looking for an alternative to the car, and they currently live in a congregate setting, or they currently live in a condominiumized setting where they have walk out their door, hop on a bus. The bus is a 30-second ride or a 1-minute ride to the transit hub. They can hop on an express train to take the GO down to a ball game or a weekend in the big city or whatever it might be. This kind of population density and growth will spur the demand and will cause government and those in power to make those changes.
Not only does it spur the demand, it provides the financial resources, and certainly significantly more than a sprawling subdivision of 2,800 units would, because the infrastructure costs per unit for traditional detached housing is far higher than it is per unit for something like this. So there's revenue that'll be generated. It's going to allow for the creation of those improved transit things. It's going to allow for improved education opportunity. It's going to allow for improved healthcare systems within the area. All of these things come from a healthy economy, and projects like this contribute to that healthy economy.
So I'll address one more thing, though, around those lines, though. There was a question that was brought forward by somebody or somebody who was concerned around whether or not we have the infrastructure capacity to handle such a subdivision. The answer is absolutely yes, we 100% do, and no, we don't. And let me tell you why I say it that way. In terms of pipes and sewers and gas lines and everything in the road, yes, as they've been ripping up, as you know, Bradford Street was recently, in the last 10 years, redeveloped and rebuilt. So too now is Essa Road. All that infrastructure is going into the ground to make sure we have the power capability, we have the right size and condition of the pipes to be able to handle it. But in addition to that, no, we already knew that we were going to have a challenge with water and wastewater capacity. And we had that challenge raised and addressed about 8 years ago. We're continuing to pay off the water treatment plant. We also had pressure from our neighbors to the north. I believe it is in Springwater. They were looking to tie into our system. I believe, if I remember correctly, that sort of was denied, for lack of a better word. But the current council and the province are addressing the fact that we're going to have some serious infrastructure investment around water and wastewater treatment. Et cetera, and that's a couple $100 million project. That's a couple $100 million project. They need to do it anyway, and so yes, that will become part of planning for that project. So when I say yes and no, it's because of those reasons.
And if we show the city that we're open to growth and building projects like this, the province is more apt to provide some of the financial resources needed for those infrastructure projects, like improved sewage facilities. There's other things too. Just if you are a business, the tech industry is still a big part of our economy and a growing part of our economy, I want to believe, in many regards. And you're looking for that place to move to. You want a progressive city with, many young, educated people that are going to work in your facility. Where does Barrie place right now on the scale amongst other cities that they may choose to locate to? Well, it could probably sit higher on that scale, and I think by being progressive, by encouraging development, bringing fresh new faces and educated people in to fill these residential properties that are being built, that's going to move us up the ladder there, and that's going to help our economy as well.
So, Mike, I absolutely support what you're saying there. As somebody who is on a certain scale, an employer as well, and in the tech space, with some of the areas of interest that I am in, we know finding talent is a real struggle. I mean, you can look. Whether you look at those billboards that are lining the streets, or you can read the Indeeds and the types of job search apps that are out there. Somebody in tech doesn't know how to say that, but finding proper talent and skilled talent is a struggle for a lot of employers right now. And I will say it, like it or not, people are being recruited from other parts of the province and other parts of the country. We're not necessarily finding all of the talent here. And that's not my statement. That's sort of what I'm hearing amongst employers in the localized area. So it is definitely a topic of concern. So if we can attract top talent in some way, shape or form, and we need to make it relatively affordable. And by that, well, your comment earlier about the median price of a home in the GTA versus the median price of a home here, relative affordability is important.
Okay, then let me ask you this, and maybe these couple questions, we're probably running out of time. We'll close out with these. And you, as a former Barrie City Councillor, are as good as anyone else that I could put this question to for a good solid answer. And that would be, what does the city, what will take place at City Hall in order for this project or a similar project of this scale, or any project? What does it take for this to go forward? Just kind of walk us through quickly on the steps once the proposal is brought to City Hall. What happens then?
Well, listen, great question, and first of all, I wish confidence and persistence and sort of a clear mind to all of the people who are at City Hall making these decisions. But typically what happens is, the transaction's taken place. It's probably got a bit of a clause in there that says subject to a few things happening at City Hall, whether it's a rezoning if required on any parts of the land. In this particular case, I know that a number of applications did come before council for certain variances from the existing bylaw to happen. So again, I'm not privy to the actual contract.
Yeah. A certain component of affordable homes, I believe, would be one of the provisions in there.
Yeah. We got to roll, Mike. So to answer your question before we got to go, we got about 30 seconds, is simply this. They're going to have to meet the test in terms of zoning. They're going to have to meet the test in terms of making sure that the project is affordable. Obviously, financial planning is going to be in place there as well. But when they come before council, there's likely going to be an offer to have a neighborhood meeting to which questions can be asked and answered. It's not just a formality. It's where the proposal, will be put forth in a lesser, what do you want to call, regimented setting, so that people can have some dialogue there. And then it's going to be, here's the other thing that's going to happen. Staff is going to have made a recommendation to council that they either should accept it, and here are the reasons why, or they should not approve the proposal, and here are the reasons why. And then council is going to have the opportunity to either hear what staff has to say and side with staff's recommendation, or disagree with staff's recommendation and go with an alternative. Here's the problem. If they go with an alternative, then staff can't support council if it's ever brought to the OMB. And with that, Mike, we are out of time. We're in the credits. We got to roll, but it's been a great discussion. I'm sure we'll pick it up on another show. Thanks.